published over 140 research papers in refereed journal, and he has written several book chapters, as well as he has edited a textbook on corporate governance and emerging economies. He also won the Best Paper Award from British Accounting Review in 2007 and Journal of Risk Finance in 2012. He has supervised 48 PhD scholars, and he has examined over 100 PhD theses from different countries. He has received research grant from different research funding agencies like Economic and Social Research Council, British Academy, Qatar National Research Foundation, Plymouth University, University of Portsmouth, and Abu Dhabi University. He is editor-in-chief or co-editor of the Journal of Financial Reporting and Accounting and Journal of Contemporary Issues in Accounting. He is also associate editor of International Journal of Emerging Markets, as well as Journal of Applied Accounting Research, International Journal of Accounting, Auditing, and Performance Evaluation. I am Dr. Ahmad Imran. I'm working as an assistant professor in Arid Agriculture University. I have over a decade teaching and research experience, and my colleague, Ms. Anam Shafiq, she is working as a lecturer, and I'm very thankful to her for her technical support. Now we formally start our session, and the session is over to you, Professor Khalid, and I'm very thankful for your time. Yes.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's my pleasure to share my knowledge and experience with all Pakistani and non-Pakistani researchers as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, can you give me the right to share my screen? So I need to be co-host.
Yes. Yes, can you share?
Yes, I can. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, it's totally visible.
Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me. Today I'm sharing my experience about writing a research paper for international journal, and I will focus my talk on what are the main criteria for international publication, what are the main contents of a research paper, and also I will end by some tips for publication, just to have a chance to get your paper published in one of the top-ranked journals. First of all, if we are thinking about international publication, we should know what are the main criteria for publishing paper internationally. First of all, you need to start by thinking about your research idea. To what extent your research idea is interesting, and also it is relevant to the reader of the journal. So if you think about publication, and if you think about international publication, you need to think about the reader of your work. You need to look at the scope of the journal to see if the journal fit well with your topic or not. And to get this point, to have an interesting idea which is relevant to the academic journal, I expect that before writing a paper, you start reading papers from top-ranked journals. So reading first, then writing. So when you write an idea, you need to be sure that it is interesting to the reviewers, to the editor, as well as the reader of the journal, and the idea itself should be within the scope of the journal. Secondly, to get your paper published, you should have a clear aim and objectives, and your research should have an impact. So clearly state what your aim and objectives is one of the main points we look at when we have to evaluate a research paper submitted to a research journal. Also, you need to have a clear motivation why you do this research, why you focus on a specific country, why you do a cross-country study. So all questions start by why. This give like a motivation of the research. So if you focus on a specific sample period, let's say 2008, 2010, you have to explain why you stopped at 2010. If you focus your research on Pakistani context, you should explain why. What's the motivation to look at the Pakistani context? So motivation here is very clear to get your paper at least reviewed in a top-ranked journal. Also, you need to highlight the incremental contribution of your work above what has been reported in the literature. So in this case, you should have a good awareness of the literature. You should be able to identify the research gaps in the literature, and then you can convince the reader that you have an incremental contribution to this literature. And the contribution could be contribution to knowledge, you add something we don't know before, or contribution to theory, you add a new theory, for example, or contribution to the methodology, you add a new methodology, or you introduce new variables in the current methodology, or you solve some problems in the current methodology, or it might be a contribution to practice, you provide a practical solution to a practical problem. Also, your research should have a clear research hypothesis. If you are, of course, quantitative researcher, or clear research questions, and these research hypotheses and the questions must be flow from the literature review. So you need to be sure that you survey the literature first, you identify a research gap, and you build your research hypothesis or research questions aiming to fill this research gap. After that, also, you need to have a sound research method, because if you have a contribution and a strong motivation, without the correct research method, you will not be able to achieve your objectives. So research method is important as well. So you need to convince the reader, which is the editor and reviewers, that the research method used is appropriate for this type of research. Also, you need to be sure that your research question has an impact. So ask yourself, so what? If you found a relationship between variable y and variable x, what does it mean in practice? Who might be affected by this kind of relationship? So your research should have an impact. And finally, the research should be clearly written. So you need to be sure that before submitting your paper to any academic journal, your research is free from typos and grammar mistake. So the traditional format or any paper, you will find the title, abstract, introduction, literature, theoretical framework. You will find research method, empirical analysis, discussion, conclusion, references, and might be appendices at the end of the paper. Sometimes we don't know what is the main component of each of these types. So title, what are the main criteria for having a good title? So good title should reflect the main contribution of your paper. Your title should reflect and should also attract the reader of your paper, because the title is the first line of your research. A reader starts reading it, and from the title you give the reader an impression that your title or your topic is new, or just is a replication of the research which has been done before. Then the abstract, you need to understand what are the main points to be included in the abstract. So again, reading different papers will give you like some information about what should be included in the abstract and what should be excluded from the abstract. For example, in the abstract, you will find most of the articles have objective. So we should have the objective in the abstract. Methodology, we should have the methodology in the abstract. The key findings, we should have the key findings. And also you can mention to the originality of your research in the abstract. So the abstract will be too short, just 250 words, and it might be structured or non-structured based on the format of the journal or the guidelines of the journal. Then the introduction, What should be included in the introduction? Of course, you start the introduction by giving an overview about the topic. Then you identify your research aim and objectives. You can mention to your research questions, your research motivations, why you do this research, the importance of your research, the contribution, which is very important in the introduction to give a good impression about the added value of your paper to the reader of the journal, the key findings, and then you end the introduction by discussing the structure of your paper. When we look at the literature review section, what we do in the literature review, we are not describing the literature. We are not telling a story about what has been done before only. We criticize the literature in order to identify the research gap, and then we can tell the reader which of these gaps will be filled by our research. So once you identify the research literature and identify which gap that will be filled, you can think about which theory you will be used for developing the research hypothesis, and you can discuss your conceptual framework as well. The research method is the most important component of any research paper, because if your research method is right, you convince the reader that you are able to achieve your research objective. They will trust you. They will trust your results. They will trust your conclusion. But you have to have a strong research method. In the research method, you need to discuss many things, like the context, why you decide to focus on one single country or a cross-country study. If a single country, you need to explain why. If a cross-country, you need to explain why you choose these countries and ignore others. So what's the rationale for having a cross-country study in this specific research area? So also you need to explain your sample selection criteria. So don't tell the reader that I choose 100 firms from the Egyptian context and full stop. Explain to the reader why 100. Don't say that I just have interview with 12 managers in the company. Explain why 12. If you use case study, don't say that I use just one case study or two or three. Explain the rationale for your decision, whatever the decision is. You have to justify it. So sample selection criteria is needed. Sample period, if you start from let's say 2008, 2020, why you started from 2008 and why you stopped at 2020, this kind of information should be provided. Data collection, explain the data collection process and also explain the source of data, from where you got this data. Define your variables, show your measurement, or explain how did you measure this variable. Also, if you use a specific regression model, explain why. Why do you use OLS or difference in difference or GMM? So whatever the method you use, you need to justify. Otherwise, the reader will not trust your findings. Then you move to the second section with the empirical analysis. You do the analysis, you show the results in some nice tables, and then you accept or reject your research hypothesis, and also you provide answer to your research questions. Up to this point, the empirical analysis is fine, but it's not enough for international publication. You have to, and discussing these findings means that you need to link your findings with both the theory and the literature to highlight the incremental contribution of your work above what has been done before in the area. And in terms of the conclusion, you need to conclude by providing a summary of the key findings and the implications of the finding, which is the impact of your research. Also, you need to highlight and acknowledge that your research has some limitations. So you need to discuss your research limitations. And finally, you end your paper by some interesting ideas for future research. So generally speaking, this is the main component of any research paper if we are thinking about international publication, which is not different from any PhD thesis or master dissertation. So research is research. So this is the main component we need to cover in our research, whatever you are thinking about master dissertation, PhD thesis, or a research paper. So if we go through these items quickly, as I mentioned, the title is read first, and the title should reflect the contribution of the paper. Some journals limit the number of words in title, like the maximum number of words 8. Some other journals mention between 8 and 15. So my personal opinion here, the title should not be too short or too long. So between 8 and also, some criteria for a good title: try to avoid any abbreviations, try to use some positive impression to attract the interest of the reader, like new evidence from a new method, novel contribution to accounting literature. Using some positive impression will attract the reader to get your message quickly. The title might suggest a relationship between two variables, like the impact of board characteristics on disclosure quality. It's better to avoid using some unnecessary words like a study of or an analysis of, because if we delete these words from the title, it will not affect the title. Could be a phrase or a question. So like, does corporate governance affect earnings management? And finally, try to avoid any mistakes in terms of grammar or capitalization in the title, because it provides a very bad impression about the quality of your work. So any reader, if they look at the title and find mistake, this gives an impression about the quality. So these are some examples for some titles I found in top-ranked journals, which I consider as not good title. For example, Tone Management in Accounting Review in 2014. The title here doesn't tell us the story of the paper. So I found, like, although it's attractive, but it doesn't tell the story. Another title which I don't like in Journal of Finance, Corporate Ownership Around the World. And the third title, Islamic Banking, Asian Pacific Economic Literature. So this title doesn't tell us what the story is. But other titles might give you impression about the main contribution of the paper, like the first title here, Capital Structure Around the World, the roles of firm and country-specific determinants. From this title, I can understand that the paper focused on factors affecting capital structure, and the authors consider firm factors and country factors. The second title also talk about risk disclosure. So from the title, I can understand the context of the study and the main objective of the title. And the third title is very attractive because it's in a form of a question: what drives mandatory and voluntary risk disclosure variation across German, UK, and USA? So this title, which gives a good impression about the paper, and at the same time, it reflects the main aim and the contribution of the paper. So after the title, we look at the abstract. As I mentioned, the abstract at least should cover 3 points. First of all, the main objective of the paper or the thesis. Secondly, the methodology used in the paper. Thirdly, the findings, the main findings of the paper. And finally, the author can mention to the main contribution of his work above what has been reported in the literature. Then if we move to the introduction, I think the introduction is the most important part in any research paper, because in introduction, you tell the reader the whole story about what you know before, what has been done, what's the objective, motivation, contribution, and the key findings. So these are the main components I found in good papers. Like introduction should start by a brief background about the topic, the research problem, the research aim and objectives, the research motivations, the research importance, contributions, key findings, and the structure of the paper. So I will go through these points quickly. And these points doesn't mean that the introduction should have 6 or 7 sections. I mean here that your introduction should include directly this kind of information. So in the introduction, we'll try to answer some questions like, what is the nature of the problem? So we need to give like a research background about the problem. What's the problem itself? So the research problem should be very clear to the reader to understand your rationale for looking at a specific research topic. After referring to the research problem, you need to discuss, okay, what's the research importance? Why this type of research is important? Important to whom? And also, what's your motivation to look at this topic? And finally, what is the contribution of your paper to the literature in this area? So these are the most important points you need to discuss in the introduction. So if we start by the first point, if we are talking about the background, what we do in the background, we try to identify and describe the main story of the paper and the main history of the paper. So it gives us and the reader the root of the problem studied. So this background help you after that to explain what the research problem is. So for example, we try to, when we write a paper long time ago, about 6 years ago, about risk disclosure in Italy, in the introduction, we try to mention to some background. So this will help the reader, especially the editor and the reviewers, to understand the basis upon which we start looking at our research idea. So we start like defining what we mean by risk disclosure. At that time, there is limited research in risk disclosure. So we prefer to start explaining what do we mean by risk disclosure, why should firm disclose information about risk. We mentioned also to some regulations related to risk disclosure. And because of our paper focus on state-owned companies, we give like a rule, information about the role of state-owned company. And finally, because our topic is about the board role, we also give some information about the characteristics of state-owned enterprises corporate governance system. So in 1 or 2 paragraphs, we give like a background about our research idea. After that, we discuss our research objective. Here we differentiate between research aim and objectives. Research aim is the goal of the project, and the research objective is the practical steps to achieve this aim. So normally when we look at the introduction and the abstract, we should find clear statement about the research aim or objective or the goal. So this kind of statement helps the reader to understand from the start what you are aiming to do. So these some examples from some papers. So these like the words or the keywords used in the papers to mention to the objective of the research. So for example, the first paper said the purpose of this research is to review. So this the word purpose refers to the objective of the paper. The primary aim of the present study is, and also in this paper, we aim to answer the important questions. Here, this third paragraph, they link the objective with the research questions. So as you can see, you should clearly state the aim of your research. In terms of the research problem, also, you need to explain what the problem is. The problem might be the result in the literature is mixed. Some people find positive relationship between the variables, others find negative relationship between the variables. In this case, you can say there is no conclusion if these variables are correlated or not. So here you'll find, for example, the first sentence, despite an extensive literature, there is little research on disclosure. So the second paragraph mentioned there is mixed empirical evidence, and the third paragraph mentioned reported results are mixed. So sometimes mixed result means that there is no conclusion by the authors about the impact of variable X on variable Y. Also, there is another example. Here they mention that although many studies look at specific research interests and they found interesting results, but this result doesn't take into account some important variables like dividend, for example. So here they explain that the result in the literature is fine, but they should consider other factors which contribute to the main dependent variable. So this, like mentioning to the research problem, and normally we get the research problem either from reading the empirical literature, or we can get the empirical problems and consider these as one of the research problem we try to solve in our academic paper. So the empirical literature also is relevant here. Research importance. You need to convince the reader that your research is important. And when you mention that the research is important, you need to ask yourself, important to whom? So we should have someone or somebody or some organizations interested in this type of research. This one example, I try to say here that this area of research has received an increased interest over the last 10 years. And the main reason for such increase is that policymakers are interested in this type of research. And this type of research provide value-relevant information to the regulators and the managers about the importance of disclosure. So here you will find that when we talk about research importance, we should refer to somebody or some organizations who might get some benefit from this research. Then the research motivation. The research motivation, ask yourself why I do this research. If I examine the relationship between governance and the quality of financial reporting, you need to ask yourself why I am interested in examining the relationship between governance and financial reporting quality. Okay, if I'm measuring the relationship between these variables in Egypt, for example, or in Pakistan, I have to ask myself why it is of interest to look at the Egyptian context or the Pakistani context for this type of research. If I didn't answer this question, this might indicate that you just replicate the same study in using another context, and this is not valid for international publication. So the third point here, you need to explain the uniqueness of your context. What is unique in your country or in your data or in your sample period, which make the study valid for international publication. So when I go back to the paper I published in 2015, I was talking about board role in risk reporting in Italy, and I looked at state-owned enterprises. So the question you should ask me, and you should find answer in the paper, why Italy? Why I'm interested to look at Italy specifically, and why I'm interested to look at the state-owned enterprises. And also you need to find out why I'm interested in board role, just board, not the whole governance system. So these three whys should be answered in any paper to highlight the research motivation of the paper. So these some examples from my papers. One paper here, I focus on the UK context. So you will find the first sentence highlighted in red. The UK provide a unique country context. And then I explain the reasons. And in the middle of this paragraph, you will find that I compare UK context with the US context. Also, in the second part here, I looked at 3 different countries. So the motivation for looking at risk disclosure in German, UK, and USA. So the traditional and normal question, why you focus on these 3 countries specifically. By explaining why these countries here, I'm providing a research motivation for my paper. So you'll find each of these countries have a distinct approach to risk reporting. So you'll find explanation what is the uniqueness of risk reporting in German, in UK, and then in USA. Also, if you focus on a single industry sector rather than the whole non-financial or the whole financial sector, again, you need to explain why single industry sector is important. What's the motivation to look at a single industry sector? So in this example, the paper considered factors affecting one type of disclosure practice, and the focus here was on oil and gas reserves. And you will find here the oil and gas sector is worthy of investigation, and explain why. The sector is also unique, being characterized by, so you will find in this paragraph, I try to justify my motivation to look at a specific industry sector, and this is needed to convince the reader that there is a rationale for choosing a specific industry sector rather than looking at all industry sectors. Also, in the introduction, you should provide at least one paragraph explaining your incremental contribution to the literature. And here, you need to mention clearly what the contribution is. If it is a contribution to knowledge, like you provide the first empirical evidence on the quality of corporate governance in Pakistan. So this will be considered as a contribution to knowledge. But of course, you need to explain in the motivation why Pakistani context matter. Or it might be a contribution to theory by using a new theory borrowed from another field to the field of business, for example, or accounting. Or it might be a new contribution to the methodology by providing a new measure for a specific variable, like a new measure for disclosure quality. And finally, it might be a contribution to practice by introducing a practical solution to a problem in practice. And here you will find examples of how people mention to the contribution in the paper. And also, if you search top-ranked journals, and if you search for the word contribution, you will find people always mention to the contribution of their paper. And I heard from one of the editors before, he mentioned that once he received a paper from any author, he searched for the word contribute, or contributes, or contribution, or contributions. If these keywords is not in the paper is just rejected. So my advice here, if you plan to publish internationally, be sure that you highlight the contribution to the literature. And this is the example. Our paper provides 3 contributions to the literature and so on. The paper makes a major contribution to the literature. Our paper makes several contributions. The paper makes several contributions. We contribute to the literature. Our paper is the first that provides some interesting results. In this paragraph, this one of my paper was my supervisor, PhD supervisor. He was always asking me to market our paper. He told me that your paper is like a product. Try to market this product. So rather than saying that the paper found a relationship between Y and X, you can explain that the paper provides a major contribution to the academic literature by providing the first empirical evidence on the relationship between Y and X. And this one of our paper, as you can see in the paragraph, we used different ways to convince the reader that we have something new. We said that the paper makes an important and a novel contribution to corporate financial reporting. It is the only paper to examine, and down we said it is the first paper to show that. So rather than saying the paper finds that, we use other keywords which highlight the main contribution of our paper. Also, you need to mention in the introduction about the key findings. So simply you can say the finding shows that, or we find that, or we provide evidence that. And this will be the last section in the introduction. After the introduction, we move to the second section because of the time limitation, and this example of how to present the structure of the paper. the paper is structured as follows. Section 2 discuss, say, literature. Section 3 discuss methodology. Section 4 the findings. Section 5 the conclusion. Or you can divide your paper into 8 sections as in this example. So after the introduction, looking at the literature review, I need to remind you the literature should not be descriptive. The literature should be critical. So you need here to provide a critical literature review, and the main purpose of the critical literature review is to identify the research gap in the area and to show to the reader which of these gaps will be considered in your paper. So literature here means that a selection of available documents, either published or unpublished, which you have used in your paper when you write your paper. But if you are thinking about international publication, my advice to you is to focus more on top-ranked journals in the field to convince the reader that you are up to date for the area, for this literature at the international level, and you provide like incremental contribution above what has been done in the area at the international level as well. So for the literature review, it should be critical. You should identify the research gap or research gaps. And finally, you should show the reader that which of these gaps will be considered. And there is a checklist from which you need to consider when you write your literature review. First of all, you need to ensure that the literature covered in your paper is related to your research questions and research objectives. This is very, very important because you don't just need to count hundreds of papers and this paper might be relevant or not relevant to your paper. You need to be sure that whatever the literature cited in your paper is relevant to your research question and objective. In other words, you need to keep an eye on your research objective and the questions when you look at the literature review. Second point, you need to be sure that you covered the most significant series of experts in the area. So first of all, you need to know who are the main experts in the area. And you will know the expert in the area by looking at top-ranked journals. You will see who is publishing in this area. Then you need to find out relevant and significant series of these experts. Also, if you plan to publish your research article now in 2021, you need to be sure that you covered the most relevant literature. So most relevant and significant. Most relevant means that the most related literature to your area. Most significant here, it's relevant to your area as well as it is published in top-ranked journals. You need to include up-to-date literature, keep updated. So if you need to send your paper in 2021 to a journal, be sure that you cover all the literature up to 2021. So this is one of the points. The second point, to see if your literature is critical or not, again, you need to link the literature with the research questions. And most importantly, the point number 2, you need to assess the strengths and weaknesses of the literature. So critical here doesn't mean that you need to criticize the literature only, focusing on what you dislike. No, you need to be fair enough and assessing the literature and identifying both the strengths of the literature, what do you like, and the weaknesses of the literature, what the limitation or what you dislike. Also, when you discuss the literature, you should be objective. Don't be biased. Don't say all the work done in this area is not good, because just you need to highlight that you have a contribution. So please be objective in your discussion. Also, Don't be biased when you choose the references. So you need to be sure that you include the references to research that support you as well as in counter to you. So if support, so choose any article, whatever this article supports your idea or against your idea. So don't be biased in choosing the articles only which support your idea. Also, when doing the critical literature review, you need to differentiate between facts and opinion. If you provide facts, you need to justify your facts by the literature. If it is opinion, that's fine. So you need to distinguish between facts and figure. But when you provide your opinion about a specific research area, also you need to justify this opinion. Why you believe so. So by providing why you believe so, you try to justify your idea, and it will be better again to have a strong and sound references to support your ideas. So these other criteria you need to check to be sure that the literature is critical, but more importantly, if the literature review section in your paper discuss the strengths and the weaknesses of the paper, if you cover all related articles to your research question, and also if you are clarifying the difference between facts and ideas, and if you support your own ideas by references. So after reviewing the research idea, you have to identify the research gap. And the research gap simply means that there is something missing in the literature, or we don't have sufficient information about a specific research problem. So this research gap, one of the researchers, Mills in 2017, divides these research gaps into different groups. He mentioned that we might have evidence gap. Evidence gap means that there is a research in this area, but the literature in this area are not the same. Some people provide evidence that the relationship between Y and X is positive. Others say no, the relationship is negative. The third group say there is no relationship between Y and X. So we don't know if there is a relationship or not. In this case, the author here mentioned it is evidence gap. Empirical gap, it often addresses conflicts that no study to date has directly attempted to evaluate a subject or a topic from empirical approach. So here we have a phenomena in practice, but there is no research examine this phenomena. For example, if we need to study anything like the quality of financial reporting before and after COVID-19, we can't do it now because we're still in the period of COVID-19. But if you are thinking about financial crisis, yes, you can do it before and after the financial crisis. So the empirical gap here means that there is no empirical research to date to evaluate or to examine this area. Also, the author mentioned the knowledge gap and mentioned that knowledge gap means that there is the knowledge doesn't exist in the actual field. So, for example, you can say there is no research on the quality of financial reporting in Pakistan. So there is knowledge gap. We don't know if Pakistani companies provide information of high quality or not. We don't know. So we need research to provide us evidence that if financial reporting quality is measured and if Pakistani firms provide information of high quality or not. Or the second case, it might be the case that the result of the study differs from what we expected. Sometimes the theory mentions that we should find a specific result, but the actual result is totally different. And again, this is considered as knowledge gap. Other gaps like practical knowledge gap, it's again the same. If the actual behavior in practice is different from the expected behavior. So for example, During the COVID-19 period now, we expect that all companies will increase their social responsibility practice, but what we found, actually, not all companies are keen to have a social responsible behavior nowadays. The gap also might be in the methodology. You might highlight some problems in the methodologies used in the literature, and you try to fill this gap by providing some practical solution to this methodology. The gap might be the theory or related to the theory. One theory suggests positive association between the two variables, while the other suggests a negative association. So there is a conflict here. We don't know which one is correct. And the gap might be related to the population of the sample. Either it is under-researched or adequately represented, not adequately presented, like focusing on a small sample doesn't represent the whole society. So once you identify the gap, you will then identify the research hypothesis or the research questions. And here, when you develop the research hypothesis and research questions, you need to keep an eye on the literature. And also, when specifically, when you develop your research hypothesis, don't rely only on the literature. It would be better to focus on theories, because the literature always give mixed results. Some say positive, some say negative. But if you look at the theory, this will be the best way to develop your research hypothesis. Then for the research methodology, in any research paper, you have to justify your research method. So you have to justify why you choose qualitative or quantitative. You have to justify your sample selection criteria. You have to justify the period of the analysis. You have to justify your model, the variables, the measurement, the data collection, and the source of data. So these should be clear in your paper to convince the reader that you have chosen the best and the appropriate research method. So for the quantitative research, again, sample selection criteria should be there, variable measurement and definition should be there, source of data. You need also to discuss your measures in details, and if you have if you done a pilot study, you need to explain the pilot study, because this increases the validity and reliability in your results. When you use specific regression models, OLS or fixed effect or random effect, you need to explain also what is the rationale for using any of these models. You need to discuss the expected result between the dependent and independent variable, and also you need to check for all assumptions related to the regressions. For the qualitative research, you need to rationalize the decision to focus on a single case study or a multiple case study. You need also to explain how many people you will be contacted and how long you will stay with them, what are their characteristics. You need to explain the response rate and to link this response rate with the literature. Also, you need to provide validity and reliability tests. Then the finding in the paper, the most important thing here, you need to link your findings with the research hypothesis. If you are a quantitative researcher, to clearly mention if you accept or reject your research hypothesis. Also, you need to provide evidence from the tables why you accept or reject this research hypothesis. If you are using qualitative research, you need to identify the research themes, and then you need to link. So you need to link the findings with the characteristics of the people you have the interview with or they fill the questionnaire. You need to link your findings with the research questions, and also for the qualitative research. In the quantitative research, we should provide evidence from the table. In the qualitative research, it will be better to provide quotation from the data collected from the interview or from the questionnaires. The most important section here before the conclusion is the discussion. So in the discussion, you need to link your findings with the literature and also with the theories. So you don't need just describe, you need to tell the reader the story about your findings. And also you need to discuss any significant or any insignificant results. You need to explain what does it mean? What is the impact of these findings on practice? And if you say that your findings are in line with the literature, so you provide the same result as the literature, in this case, you need to explain what's the incremental contribution. If your findings different from the literature, you need to explain what are the main reasons for these differences between your result and the literature results. Finally, you need to conclude your paper. So the conclusion is not a summary of what you have done. In the conclusion, you need to provide answers for your research questions, provide information about the impact of your research, the limitation of the research, what has not been done in the research, and then you can provide some interesting ideas for the future. And of course, your paper will end by a list of references. So be sure that the references are ordered alphabetically, and also be sure that you cite papers from top-ranked journals. Be sure that you are consistent in writing the reference, cite only relevant papers to your research questions, and verify articles are cited in your paper correctly. So be sure that all reference in the body of the paper is cited at the end, and all references at the end are mentioned in the body of the paper. So at this point, you have now a paper ready for submission. Should you submit? No. You shouldn't submit at this point. Now you have a draft. You are ready to submit this draft to a journal. Before submitting the draft to the journal, you need to know many things. First of all, you need to have an idea about the ranked journals. Which journals is top ranked and which journals is not. So we have different ranks. So based on your country, so ask in your country or in your university, which rank we are based on. And if you are planning to publish in top-ranked journals, you should be aware of all ranks. In Britain, we have ABS. We rank 4 star, 4, 3, 2, 1. So 4 and 3 are top-ranked. So you should be aware about this ranking actually before you start writing the paper, before start writing anything, because the first step in writing papers is to read articles. So reading here, read from top-ranked journals to be ready to publish this work in the future. So ABS is one of the ranking for the top quality journals. 4 star, 4 and 3 is top ranked. 2 and 1 is low ranked. And the rest is not ranked at all. Also, we have ABDC. ABDC provide classification for A and B is fine, good ranked. A C is low ranked. Also, you might be interested in Scopus. So once you identify the ranks, you need also to ask yourself, what research interest or what is my research interest? If you are interested, for example, in financial accounting, my sincere advice to you, you should be able to identify all relevant financial accounting to you. So financial accounting, we have a lot of journals. If you search in Google, you will find hundreds of journals. But my advice here to focus on high quality, top-ranked journals in financial accounting. And here you will find example of these high quality journals in the field of financial accounting. If you read recent articles in these journals, I am sure that you will have good research ideas for moving your research forward. So based on this article, you will find some interesting research idea, new ideas you can replicate using the Pakistani context or Egyptian context, as well as you will find in these articles the research limitations and the authors provide some interesting ideas for future research. So it's very rich source of new ideas. If you are interested in management accounting, there is a lot of journals related to management accounting. In the slide, you will find here all journals I refer to: auditing, accounting education, public sector accounting and governmental accounting, accounting history, Islamic accounting, and this another source of information I need to share with you, because most of us has a literature review in their master dissertation or PhD, and even when we do like a research paper, we should have a literature review. If you have a comprehensive and critical literature review, you might think about publishing this critical literature review in one of the top-ranked journals, which like Journal of Accounting Literature. If you are a new researcher, master student or PhD, or if you are searching for a new research idea for your master degree or your PhD degree, I strongly advise you to look at Journal of Accounting Literature. In Journal of Accounting Literature, they choose an idea, they explain what has been done over the last years, they identify huge list of research gaps, and then they suggest many ideas for future research. So if you are interested, you will find a lot of research ideas here. So this in Journal of Accounting Literature. Also, other journals provide review articles like British Accounting Review, Journal of Accounting and Economics, and Accounting and Business Research. Also, you need to be aware of the main and major conferences in the field, because this will give you indication about what are the recent research in the area. So if you are in the business field, if you go to SSRN, search for the field you are interested in. Myself, I'm interested in accounting. So if I search for accounting, I can easily identify top-ranked conferences in the field of accounting. So like AAA, like EAA, like BAFA, like CAAA, like AFAANZ, and any other conference organized by either top-ranked journal editor or top-ranked business school around the world. So again, looking at these conferences will give you an idea about the trend and the contemporary issues in the research in your field. Okay, so now we have a good idea about journal ranking, and also about what? About the conferences, to have a clear idea about the current trend in research. If your paper is ready, you will think about journal for submission. My sincere advice here, don't use this kind of website. This website in Elsevier is called Journal Finder. You put some keywords and search, so they recommend some articles, some journal to publish your article. I don't think this is the best way to find the right journal. I think the best way to find the right journal is to look at the list of references at the end of your paper and check which of these papers has been cited mostly, and this should be the target journal for your research. So when you focus or when you choose an article, before submission, you need to check the article website. Specifically, you need to be sure that your article match the aim and scope of the journal. For example, all my research is about accounting. If I plan to submit a paper on disclosure to one of the journals, this journal, for example, Journal of Corporate Finance, clearly mentions that they published papers related to corporate finance. And in the third paragraph, they provide different topics related to corporate finance. So disclosure is not included in the third paragraph. So if my topic is about disclosure only, I shouldn't publish there. But if my topic is about disclosure and corporate governance or capital structure or dividend payout policy, it might be related to the journal. So first of all, you need to look at the aim and scope of the journal to decide whether this journal is the best for your submission or not. Also, by reading top-ranked journals, you will have awareness on the style of the journal. For example, Journal of Accounting and Economics is interested in market-based accounting research, linking accounting with the stock market. So if your research interest is not market-based accounting research, you shouldn't submit there. Also, other journals are interested, like EAR is interested in research in Europe. Critical Prospects in Accounting is interested in critical research only. Accounting Historian Journal interested in accounting theory. Some journals like Accounting Review, Journal of Accounting Research, are interested only if you are using US data, and other journals might be open for all contexts. So what you need to do, you need to identify the journal. You need to reference paper from this journal before submission. You need to read carefully the instructions to the authors. You need to follow these instructions before submission. And also, you need to check the editor and the associate editor publication and cite their publication if this publication is relevant. Also, I strongly advise you to learn from other experience. There is many articles published in the top-ranked journals about the publication experience. This one example, this article talk about 100 research rules of game, how to publish in top-ranked journals. So this author tried to share all her experience in 100 rules. If you follow, you will be able. So if you follow these rules, you will have a chance to publish in top-ranked journals. Before you send your paper, you need to prepare a letter, cover letter, to the editor of the journal, saying that this paper is original and make contribution to the field, and this paper has not been submitted to any other journal. Then you need to submit, and once you submit the paper, it reaches to the editor, and the editor might reject it directly, which is called desk rejection, or send it for the review. So, because today the talk is about writing, not publication, so I will not go in depth for this publication process, but just I will mention what happened when you submit your paper to a journal. So when you submit the paper to a journal, the editorial office, check the aim and scope of the journal, and they check if the author okay. So when you submit your paper to the journal, what happened? First of all, the editorial team in the journal check if your paper meets the aim and scope of the journal. If you follow the instruction of the journal, they check the paper using Turnitin to see similarity with other resources, and if there is any problem, they look at the cover letter if you recommend or don't recommend any reviewers. Then they write a report. They send this report to the editor or the associate editor. They read your paper, and then they make a decision whether to accept or whether to reject the paper or send it for reviewers. So normally the editors try to find out if your paper has a novel contribution, if the idea is new, do you have a new theory, if your literature is comprehensive and up to date, what about the method, is the method appropriate and help the author to achieve their objectives, what about the results, are the results interesting, new, have an impact on practice or not, and finally, what about the writing, whether the writing of the paper is clear or not. Then they make the decision, and these are the decisions taken by the editor. They might desk reject the paper, without reviewing if the paper doesn't match the scope of the journal, or if they have a major concern about the contribution, or a major concern about the methodology, or a major concern about the motivation, or a major concern about writing itself. The paper could be accepted without any correction, and this, of course, should be after a long review process. If the idea is very interesting, the paper will be conditionally accepted, which means that it will be accepted subject to some minor correction. The paper could be invited for resubmission, this number 4, or based on the reviewer comments, the paper might be rejected. If the reviewers recommend a rejection and the editor believes that the paper is still interesting, they will go for the last decision, rejecting the paper, and at the same time invite you to resubmit a new paper. So I think that's all about the topic today. I will stop at this point, and I welcome any questions or comments from you. Thank you very much.
Khalid, thank you very much for your informative session. It's really constructive for early researcher. And now session is open for question answer. If any of the participant is having question, they may ask. They can raise your hand. So we have here, I think, Feroz. Feroz, can you unmute your mic?
Yes, hi, how are you? Thank you, doctors. Thank you, Dr. Khalid, for the informative session. As usual, you are in support of us. So, Dr. Khalid, I have a quick question as an early researcher regarding the rank of the journals. I'm trying to build a topic and to make it based on ABS 3 stars and above. However, there are limitations in publications, in number of publications, and the available information in comparison to other sources. So what's your advice in terms of balancing the availability of information? For example, the idea that you can find one reference in comparison to 2 or 3 references, and the quality of the journal and article that we are reviewing.
Okay, thank you, Feroz, for the question. Very interesting one. Yes, we advise our researchers to focus on high quality journals, 3 and 4 star, but you might find that the high quality journals is very limited in related to your research. That's why we normally expect from any researcher to have like some key articles. So the key articles should be from top-ranked journals. So key articles means that your method. So you have used a specific research method, and this method is based on a research. So you need to be sure that the research methodology is mainly based on a valid article, a top-ranked article, because otherwise you might find some limitation in the research methodology. So use key articles to support the key elements in your research. So to support your methodology, to support your contribution, to support the interpretation of your results, to support the development of your research hypothesis or research questions, to support your research idea. So your research idea should come from a key article or key articles. And I don't expect many key articles. I would say 3 to 5 key articles will be fine as a key. And then if you don't have enough resources in the top-ranked journals, you can look at some low-ranked journals, because some topics, unfortunately, are in low-ranked journals. So if your topic is about accounting education, for example, all accounting education journals are ranked as 2. So it's low-ranked, but you don't have any other option. You might find 1 or 2 articles in top-ranked journals, but the rest will be in 2-star journal. Okay?
Thank you very much. We have another participant, Amar Ali. Can you unmute your mic?
Yes. Thank you so much for time. Okay. And I would like to start by thanking Professor Khalid for sharing his years of experience of research publication with us. Thank you so much for your presence. And my question is a quite technical thing with regard to the research being conducted on emerging economies or developing countries like Pakistan, Egypt, or these countries. Because most of the times, if we try to work on something related to accounting or corporate governance, the data is not available, and we have to hand collect the data. And then once we have hand collected the data and we have done all the hard work to produce a paper, then some journals don't accept or don't like papers written on data of these emerging or developing countries. Now here, the important aspect, what I was thinking, whether we should go for replication studies, something being done in context of developed countries, and then try to replicate in developing country to make it digestible for the reviewers or editors, that we're not bringing something all together that is not existing on the table. Another aspect can be we try to choose a novel idea on which there is nothing available, because we have to do all the hard work. And why one should go for replication rather than not coming with something new. So this is kind of trade-off, and I would like you to comment what should be done, something new or a replication study.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ammar, for the question. I think something new is better, and working on emerging economies data like Pakistan or Egypt is not a major problem. And you might be unlucky, and also I might be unlucky to not be able to publish some papers in top quality journals because of the data and the sample size, and data is collected manually. But this, I don't think it's a problem. So what I will advise that we try to avoid any replication, because replication itself doesn't add value. But if we replicate different study and justify why you are replicating the study and what our motivation to look at this emerging economy, I think this will have a chance. But providing a new idea, I think this will be more attractive to all journal editors if we are able to provide something unique and new. For the data collection manually, I think it might be advantage for the researcher, and it might be a major contribution if the researcher highlighted in the introduction that one of their contribution is collect, let's say, large scale data for the Pakistani companies, because we don't have a database there. So in this case, this will be counted as one of the contribution of the paper. So we might be unlucky sometimes when you submit, we get rejection because of Pakistani data, but I think we need to keep trying. Ranked journals accept papers from Egyptian context, 4-star and 3-star. So just I think keeping trying, this will be the key issue.